Right, next I need to turn my attention to building up this rear subframe. So I've got to say this subframe is got a really good finish on it for come from Mini Spares, but the finish is really good. So I'm going to build up the subframe. I need to ream one of the radius arms. I'll check the pin in the other one. I've got a spare pin or two spare kits if I need it. Definitely going to do one. I'm not going to video that bit. I will stick a card up if you want to see how the radius arm reamer works. I've done it plenty of times beforehand, and I'll probably just time lapse this bit because yeah, there's not much to show. I've done it all before in previous videos, so we'll get this subframe built back up and get it back in the car. I'm so pleased though, the welding is done. I've put the welder away now. I don't think there's any more welding left to do. All the panel work's done. And yeah, I'm not looking forward to the bodywork because it's long, boring stuff, but I'm super pleased. The car is solid now. There's not any rot anywhere. Every panel is solid on it, and yeah, brilliant. Right, let's get this subframe built up and I can get it back in the car. We can get it mobile, and then yeah, I need to move it out of the workshop so I can get project kit in to convert that to a manual.
Hey Mini enthusiasts, how are you doing? So we're time-lapse through this one. Again, a lot of work done in a short space of time and still quite a bit to be done on the project, but I'm pretty confident that the car will be ready for the 13th of March Bingley Hall Mini Fair. So obviously you've got a brand new subframe. I will be reusing most of the old components going back on here, so we're not going to be only replacing stuff that needs replacing. Straight away as that hub come off, you can see the brake shoes on it actually looked pretty new. However, unfortunately, even though the shoes and wheel cylinders looked new, the wheel cylinders themselves were seized up. I did actually pull the rubber boots back, and I did manage to free the wheel cylinders up, and I took the pistons out, but you could just see where it had been sat. Obviously probably the brake fluid's a little bit old, and obviously brake fluid attracts moisture and water, and if you've got moisture content in the brake fluid, then it will cause the metal components inside to rust and corrode, and that's certainly what had happened with these wheel cylinders. So I think, as you can see, those radius arms were just covered in crud. This car has done nearly 100,000 miles. It didn't, I'm pretty sure, well, I'm certain it was the original rear subframe on it. Not sure whether the radius arms have been out before, but they're obviously just where they get greased up. All the grease collects in the corner, mixes with dirt and makes a right horrible mess. You can see they're just taking out the handbrake quadrants. I always just grab my phone and take a photo of them, because when it comes to reassembling them, I always forget which way they go round. And if you get them the wrong way round when you go back together, it's a real pain to swap them round again, so it's always worth just taking a photo. As you can see, quite a mess on the bench there from all of that crud. So much the same on the other side. I think I had the same issue with seized wheel cylinder, even though the wheel cylinder looked new. I can't remember what side it was, but one side the radius arm pin was completely shot, needed, and the bushings in the radius arm were completely shot. So in the end I completely reamed out and completely renewed one side. The other side, the pin was actually fine, the bushes were fine. There was a bit of corrosion on the pin though, so I did just replace the pin and the rubber seals at the end, and cleaned out the needle roller bearing, re-greased it, and then just checked it for play, but it was actually okay. So new pin in one side and the other side was completely reamed out. I think it's this side that had the worst pin. Yeah, as you can see, there was a big step on that pin, it was completely shot. So see me there with a phone just photographing that quadrant, so I'll make sure it goes back in the right way round. It's also worth just noting what way round the pin goes that holds the quadrant in place, because it can go either way, but if you insert the pin from the top downwards, that means you cannot then replace it on the car. So if you did have a problem, you'd have to take the whole radius arm out, whereas if you put it in from the bottom upwards, you can get it out with the subframe still in the car. Now that's how it's installed from the factory. However, I've always thought it's probably safer to be installed from the top downwards, because it can't fall out. Otherwise you're relying on the split pin to hold it in place. Now we move on to taking the bearings out this radius arm there. So this is a specific tool I bought off eBay, comes as a kit, comes with a adjustable reamer in there and the relevant bushings and drifts to get the old bearings out. That's the plastic grease tube coming out there. And like I said earlier, if you want to see how this works in detail, I do have other videos showing how to ream the radius arms using this tool. I'm not sure if they're still available on eBay, but it was about 100 quid the tool. You always have to remember there, I just put the grease tube in first. It's the first thing you need to do. And the amount of times I got that is, I've probably wasted 2 or 3 radius arm kits because I forgot to put the grease tube in and then press the bearings in and then ream them out, and it wasn't till the end you think, oh no, I forgot the grease tube. So when you drift them out, you damage the bearings. Luckily radius arm kits are not expensive, they're about 10-11 quid I think. And those needle roller bearings, I'm always very careful putting them in, because if you just beat them in with a hammer, you can damage the casing on them and damage the bearings. So I just have a bit of threaded bar there with a couple of nuts on each end and some thick washers, and I just wind them in. So the radius arm kit works by having a pilot bush at the bottom there, which makes sure that the reamer's centralised, and then the adjustable reamers on a shaft which goes through the pilot bush on the bottom. And then yeah, basically you just, first adjustment is adjust it so the reamer sits about halfway down the bush, and then you ream it through. You then need to take the pilot bush off, clean out any swarf that's gone through. So I generally use compressed air just to blow it. It comes out easily. It comes, so the reamer makes the bushing come out in like flakes. So you blow a bit of compressed air at it, it just flies away. The only thing you have to be careful with is you get to a point you need to keep checking the new radius arm pin, because you can over ream it. You can adjust the reamer up too much. You've reamed too much and then you'll get play in the bushing. So you sort of do one pass at a time, pile the bush out, clean it out, stick the new pin up from the bottom, and you'll get to a point where it just starts to, you can just feel it start to fit, and then you need to make very little adjustments on the reamer so as not to over ream it. So there we are. I've done quite a few of these using this tool now, so I'm pretty quick at it, to be honest. Now those rubbers on each end, when you're refitting the radius arms back in, you've really got to keep an eye on them, because they can come adrift when you're fitting it, and again they are one of those things that's a bit of a pain to do once a radius arm is installed on the car. So like I say, that's both radius arms done now. One side completely overhauled, the other side's just cleaned up, greased up, and the new pin in there. Quadrants back on the right way round. And the suspension knuckles on the back were actually very good. I don't think they were original, but I've cleaned up the grease out of the old ones, cleaned the knuckle up. You can tell if they're any good because the plastic cup is the first thing to wear. So the plastic cups look absolutely fine. So like I say, cleaned, greased, refitted. And one of the reasons for reusing them, one, it's a budget rebuild, so you know, where we can save money, we are saving money. But also the rubber on the later type knuckles, literally that deteriorates within 2 or 3 years. I bought brand new items, brand new knuckles. Yeah, you look at them 3 years later and the rubber's all perished and no good. So if you can reuse the old ones with good rubber, it's probably worth doing. New brake hose going on there, so they didn't necessarily need replacing, but it's just safety really. For the cost of a set of brake hoses, it's worth doing. And I've never noticed before, I know one of the viewers, subscribers, Paul Robinson, was saying about the knuckles fitting into the trumpets. I never realised before, but they are actually meant to be a interference fit, or I'm pretty sure they are. I've always thought when I took them apart that they had corroded into the trumpets, because you always have to tap them out to get them out. Stick a drift down through the middle or a screwdriver and tap them out. But when I actually looked at the knuckles that come out of these, they'd had indentations on the shaft part of the knuckle, which goes inside the trumpet, and those indentations are there to swell the metal out a little bit, so it makes them an interference fit. But I've never seen that on a new set. So, and I'm guessing the reason they do that is so that there's no chance of the knuckle joint falling out or coming out when you're going over, you know, big bumps or something like that. So just putting the radius arm back in now. Can be a bit of a fiddly job this. I've got to be honest, I've never put in a radius arm like that with a subframe stood up like that before, so I struggle a little bit, but I just thought I'd try it like that, standing up rather than kneeling down on the floor. I'm getting a bit older now. If I could do it at sort of waist height and not have to crawl around on the floor, it means I don't suffer with a bad back. Now obviously I will get the subframe partially built up to go back in the car. I don't put things on like the brake drums and brakes at this stage because the radius arms are a pain to get in. with it on the car, and being able to do it like this stood up just makes life a bit easier. But you don't want to completely build it up because it makes the subframe quite heavy then, and then you've got to manipulate it into the car. And you know, if there's two of you working on it, it's probably not too bad, but working on my own, I just try and make life as easy as I can for myself. So I think the radius arms go in, the brake hoses go in. I think I fit the metal brake pipe on the back. Handbrake cables go in at this stage, and obviously the handbrake cable routed around the quadrant on the radius arm. And the cable, the quadrant, you need to press the cable goes into the quadrant, and then you need to close up the gap where the cable sits, and it just holds the cable in place, stops it coming out. So I'm fiddling around there. I'll give a bit more of an explanation in a moment, but I was quite impressed with this subframe. It was pretty good, and things like where I've had problems with pattern subframes in the past has been the radius arm brackets. You go to fit them on and the holes don't quite line up. You know, they've just not been great in the past, but this subframe was spot on like that. And you know, it just looking at it, it was well built, well painted. But you can see I've got the welder out there, so I'll give a little bit more of an explanation for that in a moment.
Right, I don't know whether that was visible on the camera as I was working at it but this, I was singing the praises of this subframe earlier. The finish of it is good, the price is good, but the top captive nut here, or captive bolt, the captive nut was knackered. I didn't over tighten it, I didn't cross thread it, I just tightened it up, and the just wouldn't tighten up. It was like there's no threads in there. So you can get a nut up inside, so I got a nut up inside and tightened it, but then I thought to myself, the next time someone comes to take this off, and they're probably not going to for a very long time, to be honest, because the radius arms have been reamed, so it doesn't need to come off, but they'll have a right job, they'll have to take a subframe out. So thinking of the future and other people, I have just welded a new captive nut in there. And the other thing I noticed, I went to mount the brake pipe, and down the bottom here is meant to be an L-shaped bracket which mounts the brake pipe union on. Just completely missing on this subframe. Don't know whether it's been missed off or whether they don't bother fitting them, but I had to go and cut that off the old subframe. I now need to weld that on. So I did think the welding was done, but not quite.
Right, so when it comes to installing the subframe back in the car, it's never an easy job to do on your own, but you can make it, or try and make it easier for yourself. I've just used a piece of wood there, just fitting that across the subframe, sitting in the sort of the pad of the jack, and you sort of get it so it balances quite nicely. As you can see, the subframe's front heavy. I've also fitted the foam pads on top of the subframe there. I'm sure a lot of people probably just don't bother to refit them. I don't think they do much. I think they're literally just there to stop the subframe rubbing against the boot floor or hitting the boot floor. There is actually, probably depending on your boot floor fitment, there's probably a good 1 centimetre gap or more, but you got to think the subframe's all rubber mounted, and it will move if you go over bank hard and bump hard. So I think those pads are there to stop it crashing. So always a bit of a fiddle getting the back end of the subframe in there past the valance, and obviously with all the valance and the closing panels and that being new, there's always a worry that you've not aligned something up properly, but it actually went in all right. And now just a case of refitting the mountings, and it's worth that earlier step I did of just practicing fitting a subframe before you build it up, so you know all the bolts go in, everything lines up before you get to this point, because if you're struggling around now trying to line things up, it's harder work with a heavier frame. I will just mention I'd previously run, you can see the front to rear metal brake pipe on the floor there, or a reel of brake pipe, because obviously much earlier on I accidentally cut through the front to rear brake pipe, so I need to replace a whole lot. But you need to fit the brake pipe before you fit the subframe, because it goes under the floor from the front to rear, and then it tucks behind the subframe up against the heel board and over the top of the subframe rather than underneath the subframe. Now some people will, if they're refitting or doing a front to rear brake pipe and obviously they've not removed the subframe, they will just run it underneath the subframe. There's no real problem with doing that. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit more exposed there. If it's underneath the subframe, it's got or on top of the subframe, it's got a little bit more protection, but it's just very difficult to fit a front to rear brake pipe and route it over the subframe if you've not had the subframe out. So I'm just fitting the brake pipe there to the T-piece at the back there. I was actually struggling a little bit. What I had done was I'd put a new union on the end of the brake pipe, and I must have fitted the wrong one. I must have fitted a metric union, so I quickly had to just cut it off and remake the end there with a union that fitted. The brake pipe flaring tool I've got is actually quite handy, because you can make brake pipes on the car. I know some of the more expensive brake pipe flarers, I used to have a Sykes Pickervant one, and that was sort of you had to mount it in a vise, so you couldn't use it in this sort of application, but the small one I've got works fine. If you're only making brake pipes out of copper or cupro nickel, it's soft enough and it's not too much of an issue. But the sort of handheld one I've got there, if you were trying to flare metal brake pipes, I don't think it's really up to it, but it's all right for the Cunifer cupro nickel copper brake pipes and fuel pipes. So I think we're coming to the end of the video. Quite a lot done today, or in this episode. Yeah, just got to get the rest of the subframe built up, shoes on the back, hubs on, and we're pretty much done. Well, we will be done on the mechanical stuff then. So thanks for watching. Battery cable going in now. Be back again soon for the next episode, and yeah, 2 weeks to go till Bingley Hall Mini Fair. Let's bring it on.